Hi, everybody. Welcome to ZealZaddy. I'm Scott. My pronouns are he, him, and this is Story Talk, where every picture tells a story. Tonight, we're going to be talking with DMs and GMs in just a roundtable discussion. I have a lot of questions. I think chat will have a lot of questions because everybody wants to learn from everybody else. So I'm going to be very brief here. Normally, I go through a big spiel about what we're doing, but tonight is just let's learn from each other and with each other. So let me bring everybody in. All right. So there was an extra camera that was turned on by accident. All right. Now everybody's in the right place. Aleks was just covering everybody up.
Oh.
Well,
Wow.
So why don't we?
Will tell you it's normal.
Why don't we go around? Let's go around the room, and we'll start with Gwen and go clockwise around. Why don't you say who you are, where they can find you, and all the awesome things that you're doing?
Hi, my name is Gwen Marshall. Pronouns are she, her. I am a game designer and writer. I am probably best known for writing Ancestry and Culture, an alternative to race in 5e a few years ago. And since then, I've worked with 2C Gaming and WebDM and published some things in MCDM's Arcadia. And you can find me on Twitter at Gwen_H_Marshall or Blue Sky now. I think I'm just Gwen Marshall there. I don't know why I didn't do the same. That would have been smart, but you know, underscores. I want to get rid of those. So that's who I am and where you can find me.
All right, Maria.
Hello. I am Maria Moore, also known as Happy Capster. Pronouns they and she. I am a variety streamer, a TTRPG actual play performer, and the co-founder of Goblin Society Games, which is a TTRPG company focused on making board games, card games, and TTRPG supplements and settings to put on your table. I can be found everywhere at Happy Capster. I can also be found as a player in Outcast and Outclassed, which is a award-winning Pathfinder 2e game, which is still weird to say, as well as on various other channels, such as Only Play Wizards, Cafe Cultivar, and a couple other places that I'm sure I will remember as soon as we stop streaming.
Yeah, Outcast and Outclass. Some of my favorite people are on that show. Star Shinobi and Waffles and Syrup, and what a great group. Duval. All right, Aleks.
Hey, Variant Humans. My name is Aleks. Last name is Roit. Pronouns are he, him. I've been doing TTRPGs for way too long. Formerly of Dungeons and Dummies, if you guys watched that. We were an actual play on YouTube for 6 or 7 years. Nothing super exciting to shout out right now, except for if anyone watching knows David Tilstra. He and I are currently working on producing a new live in-person actual play with some really exciting talent attached that we can't wait to tell you more about in the coming weeks. That is called Story Quest. I'm sure you can find it on all the socials. I'm pretty much a ghost on there, so I don't know. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, if you have questions, drop them in chat. Just put question before it so it's easy for me to find. Also, we are a partner with Only Crits Dice. They have amazing dice. You can save a few pennies if you use my link. And let's get started with questions because I have a zillion of them. If you have more, drop them in. So here's one that every player probably wants to know, maybe more than every DM. How well do you need to know the rules of the games you're running? And how well do you know the games of the rules of the games you run? I mean, I know this is like an on the spot, like, oh, how dare you go back to that?
Right out the gate.
As a player, that just clarifying, you're asking this from the perspective of a player, not a GM.
No, I think players always want to know, what does the DM really know?
Oh, great. Just enough to BS your way through it is my answer.
Oh, that may be the perfect answer.
That's it. Whether it's 5 pages or 50 pages, in my book, if it doesn't matter, so long as I know the gist of what's going on and how I can kind of, it's like the old saying from Ye Olde Pirates of the Caribbean. It's a guideline as opposed to actual rules. Now there are some actual rules, but just focus on those ones, and then the rest is kind of smush.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it. I mean, if you want to get more, if you want to be technical, you could say something like even complex games have some core rules, right? Like in D&D, like, well, you basically know that everybody rolls initiative when there's a combat or an encounter, and then you set a DC or their armor class, and they roll a D20 and add their ability score, and then you see if it equals or is higher, and then that's it. You just keep doing that over and over again, and when they say they want to do it in a different way, you just allow it or don't or whatever, right? And so if you can get at the core mechanic, yeah, you can kind of hand wave. I know that about 2 years ago, I ran a stream called Sigil Spotlight, and I had each week, the players were all game designers. And so each week we would play something that one of them had designed. And it was so every week we played a different system. I was running it usually. So I had to learn and play new systems of games every week that I'd never played or run. So I had to be over and over and over and over again. I don't recommend that, but if you just kind of figure out what's this game's thing, and hand wave all the subsystems.
It'd be interesting to see any judge doing that. Wouldn't that be interesting to get all the any products in with enough time, obviously, to learn them and run them over a year? That would be amazing. I just don't think they have the time. But
I think the big important thing is I get asked that question a lot more about newer players that want to start DMing. Just don't worry about the rules. It's in the first page of the DMG. The rules are just guidelines. Make it up as you go along. I tell people all the time, if you've specifically with Dungeons and Dragons, if you've played 2 sessions enough to get a grasp of your character, you can probably DM. You'll be okay. Just understand the base core rules and then just roll from there. And anything it's your game. So if there's any rules that you're not sure about or you don't know how to rule, don't worry about breaking out the book and double checking everything. Do it after the session. Make it up as you go along. Because, chances are, if your players are as new as you are, no one's going to know better anyway. Who cares?
Yeah, and it's important to communicate with all this with your players too. Just be honest, look, I'm new, or I don't know this, because I've been in situations where there's a very new DM or GM with experienced players, and if you're open about it, sometimes the players can help out. You can kind of outsource some of the rules lawyering to good-natured players. And you can let them know, well, I'm going to have to. And, different DMs take a different approach when a question comes up. Some people will be I'm going to give this 30 seconds of debate, and then we're moving on. Other DMs just make a judgment call and check later. Anything's fine that doesn't ruin other people's fun or your own.
Yeah.
I think you touched on something.
No, go on.
I think you touched on something that I think is a really important keystone, in my opinion, for if you're running TTRPGs, and that is communication at your table is kind of important, whether you've never played together, especially if you've never played together before, but whether you've been playing for 12 years or 12 minutes, the communication of exactly what you're talking about, whether you've GM'd a lot or not, or saying, if you have GM'd and you have brand new players, making sure the communication is, if you have questions about how to play the game, let me know, because, I can help, and it's not fun if you don't know what you're doing. But then even to the extent of, consent and safety, again, especially with people you've never played before. And even, I also, just a slight tag on that, if you've played with the same people for 1,000 years, give or take, it's still important to do safety check-ins, because even if you've been best friends with somebody for 12 years, they may be going through something that you don't really, that correlates in a way you don't understand. So it's always good to have communication at your table.
True.
100% agreed.
Yeah.
We did get a question from David Tilstra. When starting a new campaign or story, where do you start? With a specific story or with developing out a world? So world building first, or just go with a story?
So for me personally, my process is the inspiration for a new world hits me the same way that it hits all of us. Like, I steal it from other media outlets. Like, I'll be watching Treasure Planet. I'm like, this is super rad. I can adapt this into a TTRPG. But for me, it always starts in world building, and I think that's I know it's not the same for everybody, but I'll get a city together, like your initial city, what the landscape of that city looks like, and what the theology and government of that city looks like, and then just start adopting or expanding out from there. So like the local government is like monotheistic or not involved with the church at all. Okay, do they need gods? Start building out your pantheon, and then just spreading out like that. But I'll never world build past like the information I'd need for like 4 sessions of gameplay. Because I'm a big fan of, I'll run it at the table. I make sure I have all the information that you're going to want to ask in those first few sessions, and I'll kind of let my players world build from there. Like, oh, what if we go here and explore this? Yeah, I totally have a plan for that. Let's do that next week. And then it's 3 days of me drinking coffee up 72 hours straight, trying to world build things that they gave me ideas for, that I totally had ideas for in advance.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I've heard this question before, and there always seems to be like 2 style answers, top down and bottom up, right? Like, I always was in awe of those DMs who are like, they say, hey, I ask, how's your campaign? You're preparing a new campaign. How's that going? Okay, so first I started with writing about how the universe was created. And then I laid out all the gods and the history of the whole cosmos. And I'm like, oh my God, you've got this whole, like a novel here. I start with, I'm a bottom up person planner. So I think like, well, what kind of experience do I want to have? Right? Or create. So I might be like, ooh, I want a heist. And then I'm like, no, I want it to be a fantasy heist. And then I'm like, okay, so that's one way. And then the second one is it depends on the players, right? Because I know for some players, they want the big sweeping epic tale of whatever to explore their favorite established setting. But others, they want to get into the nitty gritty of how their characters, whatever, have this torrid romance or tragic backstory. And so then I just start thinking about how can I pull those heartstrings. But again, it's always from like an experience first to what would the situation be to create that, to what world could I put that situation in that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a little bit similar to how Aleks preps. I'm actually preparing to run a home game, a home D&D game, and I have the benefit of having a homebrew setting that I've been building on for multiple years now. But the way that I typically come about it, if we all decide, again, talking to the players, that we want to be in this homebrew setting, I too kind of start with a theme, because I've come with this homebrew setting already. I know my pantheon. I know all of these things already. I can narrow a little bit more about what theme are we doing. In this case, it's horror based. And my players, again, wanted it to be a little bit smaller scale, so we're not going like multi-continent. So we're focusing on one city and the things around it, and we're going to go into the nitty-gritty and details of that specific space, and tell our 3-act story, or however long we go, in this one space. And so then it, again, takes me down the trail, kind of what you were saying, Gwen, of, okay, this is the impetus, this is what my players want. Now, how do I get them there, and how can I be super broad in my thought, enough that I can improvise on the fly, but have enough intricacies and small things and little pieces in place so that regardless of where they go in this small space, they'll always have something interesting to look at or touch or interact with or anything like that. When I don't have the luxury of playing in my own homebrew world, or if I'm playing in like a pre-established setting, the thing that I typically will do is have an endpoint kind of figured out, roughly, and have who my players are and their characters, and then I'm like the GIF from, I think it's not The Office. It's with the guy with the giant conspiracy board, and he's like walking around with his hands in the air. That's me, because trying to figure out where my players are and where I want them to get is a challenge. Not quite 72 hours straight with 17 cups of coffee challenge, but trying to weave those noodles together of point A to point end is always a little bit tricky for me, but I try to do it as best I can. Always Sunny, thank you.
Yes.
I will also piggyback really quick. Shameless self-plug for a company that I really enjoy supporting. If you are having trouble coming up with like unique ideas for world building, especially during your session 0, there's a lot of tools out there that will help you do that with your players in a way that will get them more engaged. If anyone knows about Decuma from Golden Lasso Games, it's a tarot card multiplayer system where you lay out all your questions and you answer them with your players. And there's questions about their backstory to tie your party together. There's questions about the locations they want to start in. I've run and been a part of so many one-shots that we've done with like Morgan Duty, who's a regular on this channel, with David Tilstra, where we implement Decuma even for like 3-hour one-shots, and it makes the worlds feel that much more alive the second you step into it.
Yeah. It's an amazing piece of kit for our DM. We used it for our currently running Kids on Brooms mini campaign. We're on, I think, episode 3. I fell in love with it, ordered it right away. I saw it at Gen Con, but I couldn't. I think they actually sold out or something because I couldn't get a copy. But amazing. It was so good. It created connections between the players immediately that were deeper than most of them write in if you give them pages and pages of places to write.
For sure.
It was beautiful. So speaking of Always Sunny, what are some of your favorite go-to media products, books, shows, movies, streams, games that you fall back on to get good ideas? Because I think most people have their favorites. Like my favorite, Neil Gaiman. Any book could make amazing content for a game, I think. You know.
It depends on the genre.
For sure.
Like,
but maybe you have
me,
favorites for specific genres.
Yeah. So for me, sci-fi, I love Treasure Planet. I love Cowboy Bebop, Firefly. I like the sci-fi that's a little bit gritty, a little more space cowboys than space opera like Star Wars. And it was the Treasure Planet specifically was a super big inspiration for a like 6-episode actual play that I ran what feels like eons ago in 2019 called Hellbine, which is actually a book setting that's now being released next month, which is wild to think about. But it started as like, what if I put it in a DM or in a chat message with a bunch of people, and I was like, what if I did a TTRPG that was based loosely on Treasure Planet? And everybody was like, that would be the most amazing thing in the entire world. And I said, okay. And then I sat and cried about it and all the ideas I didn't have until they came into ideas. The secret tears are the tears that no DM tells you about. But so for sci-fi is that. For me, fantasy, there's always like the Lord of the Rings that kind of is just in the back of my head. But there's a book series that is written by Garth Nix, and it's
Sabriel?
The Sabriel series. Thank you so much for saving me. That series has such a phenomenal way of using magic that I try to take it every single time that I possibly can, because it's so delicious and unique, and I haven't really seen it used in a lot of other places. But so those are my top 2: Treasure Planet, Sabriel series. Very good.
Yeah, for me, definitely like for Spelljammer campaigns, especially because like I've been playing D&D since like the mid 90s, but I came in like very poor, so I didn't have any money for third edition books, so I was just scalping AD&D stuff when it was cheap. So I do, like, when I'm doing, again, you know, like a space thing, Spelljammer, Treasure Planet, the two go hand in hand. Another big one, if it's more sci-fi, I really like referencing like older Star Trek series, like anything from like Voyager or Next Gen, because those are like peak episodic comedy adventures. From a pure fantasy setting, always 100% either for like a world building thing, the Silmarillion is my go-to. And I will like annually reread the entire Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Also, a really unique take on like how magic works. If anyone is too lazy to read them, there is a Studio Ghibli movie that is based on the third book in the series that is very good. Yeah, I think like old literary references, I mean, for all of us, obviously, like The Lord of the Rings and things like that are like, that is high fantasy. What else, what other benchmark do we have? But yeah, in short, we kind of talked about this before we all got on here. There are no more original ideas. Just scalp.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely a remixer more than a creator, you know, as a DM. So like fantasy, I know that Lord of the Rings is the go-to, but I actually normally prefer more like the old Robert E. Howard Conan style sword and sorcery, kind of darker, smaller scope, a little more murky morally. I just enjoyed those as a kid. I mean, I enjoyed Lord of the Rings too. I loved it and read it many times, but I don't know. That was what really got me fantasy wise. And so when I am creating fantasy worlds, I normally have that, all that whole genre, because that's just the paradigm of that. Science fiction, it really depends. I really do have a soft spot for cyberpunk, and so I read a lot of that gritty 80s cyberpunk fiction, like, you know, William Gibson and whatnot. So I like to try and capture a lot of that stuff. I mean, if I'm going to do space opera, I usually do Dune more than Star Wars. If I want that big kind of grand galactic scale, you know, but so I usually just steal from my favorite books or movies. It does also depend on sometimes, like and this goes to the previous question, you know, like what what system you're using, right? Because the players, we might all have agreed first, well, I want to try out that new you know, Worlds with the Stars Without Number or whatever. And so then of course that's going to really narrow what kind of game I'm going to run and what media I'm drawing from. But then on the other hand, sometimes there'll be some media I consume that I'm like, oh, I love this so much, I want to run a, like I read the Iron Druid series, which is urban fantasy, contemporary kind of. And I'm like, I need to find a system that I can play that would let me run a game that makes me feel like this, right? Urban Shadows, maybe, for example, might work.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, there is some amazing material out there, and I agree. I agree partially that you should stick genre, you know, via genre, but I think there's a lot of good, interesting things you can pull from science fiction to put into fantasy and make your fantasy much more, I don't want to say challenging, not so atypical from what people have seen.
A little bit more
play.
Nuanced, yeah.
Yeah, so that they take away from it something different than what they get if they play, you know, the Lord of the Rings remixed, you know, 40 times over. You know, there's things that when I run fantasy, I pull things out of science fiction sometimes that are really weird, and it makes it suddenly different than what was expected. And I like that feeling.
And just to jump in there, I really love the mixture of the two, when it's that like far future, it's so far in the future, it's fantasy again.
Yeah.
And I don't mean because it's so high tech, I mean because the universe is like decaying. So like Jack Vance Dying Earth series or the Gene Wolfe series is, you know, like those make me, you know, or when I was a kid, because I'm going to age myself now, Thundar the Barbarian, right? Classic cartoon from the early 80s.
Yeah.
Which was far future. Right?
Yep. Even in games, Rifts is very much like that. It's a mix of fantasy and science fiction, and it's completely deadly. I mean, I played it one long campaign. I don't know how I survived. That was like a death machine roller coaster on you all the time. We got another question. What's your favorite homebrew rule? So, and this isn't saying necessarily your rule, but one you've come across that you liked. I mean, it could be either.
Well, this is a homebrew rule now, but it wasn't for the last 20 years. It's specifically in D&D 5th edition. Magic spellcasting can absolutely crit on a nat 20.
Spell attacks, yeah.
I don't know why Wizards chose to get rid of that. I don't know why they decided you can't crit with spells anymore, but it's a homebrew rule now. It's
So your homebrew rule is to keep the old rule.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we all have, like, in our tool sets, we've all built up a ton of, micro homebrew rules over the years, whether it's just like creative rulings or whatever. Like, a big one that I've always done is I don't like to award inspiration. I let my players award inspiration.
Me too. Players do it
I
too.
think it keeps everyone more engaged, because I think we've all had the people at our table that are just like, yeah, cool, I'm going to check my Twitter just to let me know when we roll initiative. You
know what I found with that really was very interesting? Almost never does inspiration in my games, because of that, get awarded for combat. Almost never. It's almost always awarded for a great interaction that led to an interesting outcome. Not even a positive or bad or negative one, just an interesting one. Or figuring out something very complicated, or just great dramatic moments between players and NPCs.
I actually, you just reminded me, there is one other one that I started utilizing about a year ago when I stole this from Brennan Lee Mulligan. If my players have their own interpretation of how a spell should work, so for example, like if you want to use Ray of Frost to freeze a surface above somebody, as opposed to hitting the actual target and having that collapse and fall. Any kind of a creative way you can think to work a spell to your advantage where you're still staying within the realm of the description. I will make you roll an Arcana check in addition to your spell attack in order to determine like how well you pull it off. But if you nat one it goes very bad.
So crit's the other way.
Yeah, pretty much.
I like to borrow games rules and techniques from other systems and use them. So like if I'm running D&D, I often use inspiration like the Bent Knee system in Savage Worlds, right? Or I'll use kind of world building styles and techniques from Powered by the Apocalypse games to have the players create NPCs for me, that sort of thing. Or I'll even just steal from video games, like playing Divinity 2. I definitely started letting players interact with their environment in new ways with their magic. So like yes, please light your grease spell on fire, and I think that you cast a water spell on that person and now they're getting electricity spell. I think it should do more damage. That's fun. Video games also are a big inspiration for me.
Oh, SimCity's never been an inspiration for me though.
I actually ran a campaign that went level 1 to 20 in 5th edition. It took like 2 or 3 years. And it started with Lost Mines of Phandelver, and we moved on from there. But one of the characters loves sim games like that, SimCity. And so his character was elected mayor of Phandalin. And so then I created a little like sim village side system, so that like on downtime he could make decisions about like should they build walls or should they plant more fields. And then the next time he checked in, they'd be like, well, you built walls and hired guards, so now there's a food shortage, and he'd have to do stuff like that, right? Just to keep him occupied.
Wow, I don't think I could ever quit your game if you gave me that in a game. I would be like, oh no, you can't stop running.
I can't think of any. All right. A very, very, very general. It's not a specific thing, but for me, something I do, and it's a similar thing that's taught in improv and in a lot of theater places is yes and, which is kind of what you were alluding to, Aleks, with a lot of your things about spells, is if your players have an idea and they posit the idea to you, they say, hey, I want to try this. It's in my best interest as the GM to try to figure out how to make it work. Or how to make whatever's happening more interesting. So the best things, the best responses are the yes and. So yes, you have to do this thing and this is what happens. The yes, but. So yes, you can do that thing, but this is the consequence that's going to happen to it. The no, but. No, you can't do that. But this is what you could do instead. This is what you notice instead. Or the no, and also something bad's going to happen. You know, that level of hierarchy that kind of is played in Powered by the Apocalypse with the success tiers and things like Quest. I think has a similar success and failure tier system. Yeah. So I very much also echo Gwen of taking things from other systems and putting them into what I'm playing, because it makes the more systems you play, the more tools you have to add interest to your game. So, for example, Blades in the Dark does fantastic things. I absolutely love the Forged in Dark system. They have flashbacks where you can flashback to a scenario before your heist, usually is heisting stuff, to make something, a situation, a thing, appear in the current time, something that you need. You take stress for it, which is a mechanic in the game, but then you have this thing or this person or this opportunity because you had planned for it in the past, technically. And the playbooks, the general idea of playbooks from Powered by the Apocalypse, from Forged in the Dark, from a bajillion other different systems nowadays, having a very concise, these are the things you can choose from, and also these are prompts that can help you connect to your fellow characters, not just players, but your character, how you all fit together. You know, there is a time and a place for you all meet up in a bar or a tavern or wherever, and you don't know each other and you're all thrust into the situations. There's definitely time and place for that. But there's also a time past that where, well, now you're together. So what are you gonna do about it now? And I do think stealing from other systems, of trying to get that underlying base of like, these are small points at which we're connected and we can explore them as we continue on, is super important. Again, just echoing what everybody's already said, just grab things from other things, play more games, play a lot of games, and take things from those games.
Yep.
Yeah,
Sure.
We're in the golden age for a reason. There's a lot of really amazing games out there, and game creators are just, the quality of games that are being dropped. I mean, I'm going to give like all the crowdfunding tools props for that, because they've really allowed people to produce at a quality they would not have been able to, 10 years ago, whatever. And because of it, there's just a crazy number of really interesting, often very niche, but not always, types of products, from, solo play games like Void 1380 was released right before Gen Con, and it's about running an AM radio station. What an odd idea for a game, but it's a solo play game where the goal is to create the best radio list of music. Like, it's really fun and kind of ridiculous, but in the best kind of way. All right, so the next question is, what about your games in particular? Not about in general, but how sensorial do you get or like to get when you run your games? Do you like to use VTTs or in-person battle maps, props, terrain, miniatures, audio, video? What are, designed tools, handwritten letters? Like, how far do you like to go with making it an immersive experience beyond just role play?
Yes. I think is the short answer. I mean, for me, like again, and everyone on this panel, I'm sure, like been playing TTRPGs for a long time. We all start with nothing in our tool set. So I have a lot of respect for other DMs who also focus a lot on theater of the mind. Like for example, like I'm also really big on props, and some of the other DMs I play with are also really big on props. Um, Miniatures I will usually break out for like key mark encounters, quote unquote. Partially because like you want it to feel like an event and you want it to feel special. Also, like I'm just too lazy to set the table every week. Um, but I think there's a fine line in creating a good narrative between giving your players the experience of both. So if your players want to start a tavern brawl, let them get that tavern brawl. Don't go digging through your closet for 3 hours for miniatures. You know what I mean? Just work it through with words. But then when you have the big grandiose encounters, especially for newer players, I feel like it's really important because I feel like newer players don't have the vision in their head yet, in terms of like, okay, you're in this dungeon, you see this and this and this, and that's all kind of just an afterthought. All those words and phrases are an afterthought once initiative gets rolled. Whereas if you put it in front of them, they can see, okay, cool, there's a broken column here that the rogue can stealth behind. I can misty step up to this ledge that I didn't know was there before. I feel like veteran players do a better job of kind of interpreting the environment with theater of mind. I know David does this as well. And I've stolen this from his toolkit. He's very big on like, he'll let players kind of invent things for the battle map if it makes sense when he runs theater of the mind. So it's like, okay, we're on a ship dock. Okay, are there like explosive barrels? You know what? Yeah, that would make sense. There are explosive barrels.
Right. Awesome.
So I think it's really good for if you want to really grab your players' attention. Like I use a little bit of everything. Everybody should, if you can. Not all of us have the resources, but I think the more important thing is than what you do use at your table is understanding that like just doing theater of the mind is good enough. Your game isn't worse than anyone else's because you use less physical things.
Yeah, I think that last point is absolutely 100% spot on. You don't need fancy stuff. You don't need, a bajillion miniatures or like the biggest dwarven forge pre-painted miniatures that cost like $1 bajillion. If you want to have something that you can see, like if you are someone who has maybe a little bit of trouble visualizing things, having something physical, whether it's just a drawing with some dice on it to give a placement of like where people are in conjunction to each other, or if it's, if you're using a VTT, me as a GM can say, all right, there's a circle here, and that is a pile of rocks. The square over here is a tower that you can climb. It doesn't have to be elaborate. And it also is something, I'm a big theater of the mind person. I love using words to describe things around. And I do think that it is something that can be done well, but it puts a lot of onus on a GM to make sure there is the information being brought across. So if me as the GM describe a room and I say, you enter a stone room, there's a door on one end and 3 buckets of water in here. That gives you as a player, there's 3 buckets of water in a single door. Or I could tell you you're in a stone room and it's crumbling. You can hear a slight rumbling coming from the opposite door. There's 3 buckets of water. There's also 4 sconces, 2 of which are lit. And you hear this strange dripping sound coming from one of the corners. Now I've given you, we have water, we have empty buckets, we have sconces with fire, and a weird sound and another weird sound. So it's about how you, as the GM, describe it, which, again, is a lot more work on your end. And I do still think for big battles where there's a lot of moving pieces, unless you are very, very good at keeping track of things in your head or on paper, sometimes it is good for those giant ones to just pull out something that you can see. Because I've lost track of... Once I get past like 6 different things, enemies, terrain, encounter, like anything in one given battle, I'm...
Right.
Nope. It doesn't work.
I want to piggyback on something you just mentioned, because that is, I feel like, a big thing even for veteran DMs, is like we just get overwhelmed by the sheer mass of things. And to piggyback on something that Gwen had mentioned earlier, I stole this from DOS 2 and now Baldur's Gate 3. If you're running a huge, like, city-wide battle, don't be afraid to group multiple enemies into one action. If you have, you know, like a pack of goblins and there's 5 of them, but you actually have 50 goblins, let them all share one initiative order, let them all share one movement, and, you know, even one attack. Just let them roll 5d20. They all happen to have scimitars. Okay, cool. Roll. Done. So don't be afraid of cheating your way through it, because your players won't know the difference. And the game, and believe me, the game will go much faster.
Yeah, and it really does depend whether you're playing in person or online, right? When I'm in person, I do have some minis and I do have some terrain, but it's a lot of work to pull it out. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but building a terrain and having it set aside for the set piece battle, and then the players just mess around the whole time and want to go shopping, and you never get to that battle, and you're like, what the F? So, you know, that's a thing that happens. So I usually just have a wet erase mat, you know, and then I just quickly sketch it out, because I am a visual person, and so battles I'll usually, especially if they're a tactical system like D&D, then yeah, you know, they need to know, well, can I get 2 or 3 in my cone or whatever? And, you know, there are rules for doing that, even in the DMG, for calculating that sort of thing, so that you don't have to kind of guess or hand wave. But I like to do it visually in person. Now online, I kind of I do really like collecting maps, and so I will have maps for almost every environment that they're in, even when there's no combat expected. I'm just like, oh, you're in a city and you're shopping. Here's a map. Where do you want to go? Here's where these shops are, and those shops, and then I just like being able to they inhabit a visual space. And then I will, I'm also, because I'm so visual, I will have images for as many NPCs as I can. And I'll also have kind of evocative scenes and stuff, because when I'm preparing as a DM, when I'm thinking about what story I want to do for next session, I will spend my time on Google Images or whatever, just looking for something that inspires me. Like, ooh, that's a cool orc shopkeeper. Okay, well, I guess my town's going to have an orc shopkeeper, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah. And then if I'm doing a different sort of game, say like I ran a Vampire the Masquerade game for a while, and so I had a playlist, right? There's music, and it was very important to me. I don't know if the players really got into it, but it was very important to me that there be the right music for each scene, right? And if they were paying attention, they might have picked up on some story things, like, why is Concrete Blonde's Bloodletting playing right now? You know, like, well...
I think you brought us some things that I also really enjoy. I'll do ones that are both for online and in person, and then more the in-person ones. The things that I like to use for in-person are physical props. I am the biggest sucker. If you hand me a blood-stained, in quotation marks, note that I just found in somebody's pocket, I will probably scream. In fact, I did that. I had my players once signed a contract with a devil, and I wrote it on a piece of very worn parchment, and kind of forged their character signatures on it. But it was all blood smattered and weird, and had little clues and stuff all attached to it, because that sort of stuff just fuels me. And as a creative person, I just love making those kinds of things. So if I can give my players things, or like for D&D specifically, I bought like a batch of different sized glass bottles and put red D4s in them for for healing potions that people found. So that all you have to do is just take this and just dump it out, and voila, you have your healing potion. It's a little harder to do that on online games, although Syrup from Waffles Maple Syrup did a really great job of sending us letters that were from our characters' parents and family that were sent to our character. It was really, really cool to receive it in the actual mail. But for online and in person, I am, and you remind me of this, Gwen, I am the biggest music person. For me, music helps me focus and be in like the emotional mindset a little bit more. So I have, and I kid you not, 20 plus playlists of various different emotions, atmospheres, places, themes, fantasy versus sci-fi versus horror versus fantasy at night, or combat very scary, or all that. And a lot of it, 90% of it, I found other people have made. Some of it I've made myself, but music is a humongous thing for me. And if I am able to, and you ever play a game with me, I will almost certainly have music. Almost always.
One thing. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, go ahead.
One thing that I found. Okay, my wife had gotten a Cricut, one of the things for printing out on, like, to make stuff, and it makes really good cutouts for your battle map. Like, you can do like a floor plan, print it out, and it will cut all the shapes out. And you just go do 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 do, and they have some that are sticky vinyl, and it will stick to the battle map, and you can just peel it up when you're done, and it looks so much better than hand drawn, which I used to do hand drawn just like Gwen, and that Cricut is so damn cool for that. I mean, just amazing stuff.
There's a lot of people that make that kind of stuff too, with like the very 1985 games has some of like the pre-cut ones that are like, some of them are even double-sided, so you can have a tree that's like green, or you can flip it over and it's like either on fire or autumn or anything like that.
There's also like Dungeon in a Box that literally does like paper two-way cutout miniatures. So they're on a little plastic base, and you just slip your piece of paper in it, and boom, there's your miniature.
I mean, this leads to the next question anyway, so why don't you jump into it?
Yes.
Like straight up. Like exactly what Maria got. Yeah, so this is like from our old actual play. Like I signed a contract with Asmodeus on an Orthon's ass cheek. And 2 days later in the mail, I get this like stained piece of parchment with all the legally binding terms on it, and it's been sitting on my bookshelf ever since. And it was a super small campaign. I can't even remember half the players that played in it at this point, but like I will always remember this.
We did get a question from David Tilser, but I'm going to get to it in a minute. I want to get another question since we're kind of on a roll with this particular topic. So what does your DM's toolkit look like? What is your software, hardware, and physical stuff that you love to use? Like, what are they? What are the things that are like, I think everybody has their own toolkit, and they're very interesting to me. I think a lot of DMs find them fascinating, especially if they're new DMs that are trying to figure out their toolkit.
For me specifically, like I now in the modern age, specifically, I have a portable Bluetooth speaker. Same reason as you guys. Music is super important, even at a home game. Sometimes I'll tuck it up underneath the table. You won't even know it's there until audio starts going. If you've never used tabletop audio for your games, I highly advise that everybody watching this check out tabletop audio, because their resources are fantastic and it's free. All the standard measurement tools. I have my cones, I have my spacers in case anyone wants to cast fly. If you do play with miniatures, ticky-tack is your friend. You can never have too much ticky-tack. Always got to have it. Because, listen, anyone that's been DMing knows for a long time, your players guaranteed every session will throw a curveball at you that you were not expecting. If all of a sudden my player's like, yeah, I'm going to go gaseous form and cling to the side of this building. I have no way, my dude, to stick your character to the side of this building. But now I have ticky-tack. But like, yeah, all the standard measurement tools I use. Bluetooth speaker. I also have, for like playing on the go, I have a little more techie. I have a digital grid. So it is 2 mirrors inside of a box, and I can project a up to 100 by 101 inch square grid onto a table. Um,
Wow.
but I'm also like I'm a tech geek, so like that kind of like I see that kind of stuff and I'm like, yes, I need 10 of those. Um, but it makes like, you know, your improv battle maps a lot easier if you're just like, I'm gonna break out a few miniatures and I don't have a gridded map, so I'm just gonna make my own grid. You obviously as DMs don't need anything like that. Um, yeah, I mean, like even for like a standard DM's toolkit, if you plan on playing tabletop, like just have yourself a good notebook, have a pen that has reloadable ink cartridges.
Yes.
Um,
Or a pencil with like a mechanical pencil with a lot of lead
Yes.
and extra erasers.
Or 10
yes,
pens.
Both. 10 pens or
10
10
pens.
pencils.
uh,
Enough for you and your
fidget,
friends.
fidget spinner and stress ball. You need both, not one.
Yes, exactly.
Or if you don't have that, just invest in at least one giant die.
Yes, yes,
At least
for
one.
sure.
For one, it's good to hold. Two, it makes a big thunk.
It also gives the players, especially if they're new, that Stranger Feelings experience or that Stranger Things experience when you roll that giant clonky die down. I think it even creates slow motion in real life. I'm not 100% sure of it, but it sure feels like
Cannot
it.
confirm or deny.
It's also really, really good at dealing with problem players from a distance.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything that hasn't really already been mentioned. Like I've got my GM's bag, like because I used to run games at conventions. You know, like at Gen Con, I'd run Adventures League enough to get my hotel for free, which is way too many games to run in like a weekend. But it's like 30 hours of games or something bonkers, and in 2 days. And so you know, I've got my GM's bag, I've got my Chessex wet erase mat, I've got a thing of markers, I've got a stack of note cards, I've got pencils, I've got a couple sets of dice, I have cough drops because if you're doing it all day at a game convention, your throat will die. Um, I've got some like basic minis if I'm going to use them. And then of course it ends up being like, okay, I know those are minis or wolves, but we're going to say they're giant spiders. You know what I mean? Because there's no way you can pack everything that might conceivably come up. Online is a little different, you know, it depends on what tabletop you're using. I have a massive selection of PDF game rules I've bought. I have big folders full of images that I have indexed into subfolders and all names so that I know what they are. And maps are like that too. And so there's often like, oh, somebody wants to run a game. I'm like, well, hold on, bloop, bloop. I'll just start dropping things into my Roll20 or whatever. And then I'm ready to go. Maps, minis, and images and everything. It's also why I'm kind of a fan of buying adventures pre-built on those platforms, because then it's all there for you.
Yep.
One of these days, I'm actually going to drop for the money for one of those Beetle and Grimm sets to play in person. That comes with all the stuff, but I haven't. I think I might do it for the Planescape because that's my Planescape and Underdark are my favorite places.
Yeah.
Planescape's probably my favorite full-on D&D setting of all time, thanks to the
box,
video game.
That box has got to be huge, just for like the amount of content in the city of Sigil itself. It's like that box got to have at least 200 minis in it.
Huge.
Well, I'm gonna find out.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that these two have already said have been stated by both, because you should probably have a set of dice or digital dice. There's a lot of free digital dice rollers if you don't want to have if you are one of the fine few who is not a dice goblin.
Boo.
Blessings upon you. But some kind of dice clack roller. I won't show you the box of dice that I have. A thing to write down, not just the notes before game, things you say during the game. So I cannot stress how important this is. You will not remember in 2 days the name of that NPC you made up on the fly, nor what they looked like, nor where they were.
Yeah.
If you don't write it down.
Don't forget,
players want to go back to that particular goblin.
Boblin the Goblin, yeah.
Yeah, who was in that one house that was really fancy. Why was that fancy goblin there? I don't remember there being a fancy goblin, but now they want to go talk to the fancy goblin again. Okay, so write it down. If it's in a notes app, if it's on pen and paper, it doesn't matter. Have a something. Have something next to you all times. Write it down.
Or just record your sessions.
You can also record your sessions. If you're able to do that, great. That's great. That's awesome.
That also means though you have to go watch your whole session again to
that's
get
true.
the
You
note
could do
you
an
need.
audio. Like if that is also the downside. One of the things though that I have used a lot, especially when it comes to world prep and giving my players some jumping off points for character creation or to connect their characters a little bit. There's a series of books that were written by James D'Amato called The Ultimate RPG Guide.
Yep.
There's like 3 of them, I think, right now. Well, there's 4, but 3 of them come in a set together, and it's the Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide, Character Guide, and Game Master's World Building Guide. And it's a lot of prompty-based questions, and I really enjoy them because you don't have to go through the entire book and answer every question, but what it can do is give you inspirations to start thinking about either how can I put this in my game, how can I put this into my characters, or this isn't quite what I want, but how can I put it, how can I use this elsewhere? Another one that I can't remember right now is Tales of Fable Tale. There's 2 books that I have that are literally just random tables of things that are, let me grab them. Actually, 2 seconds. They're right here, I promise.
While they go to get that, there's one thing I'll add to the list idea. I have a list of names that are unused. Just good names so nobody has named Tim again.
Yes, that is so important.
Fantasy name generator.
Yes. Yeah. Table Fables 1 and 2. They literally called a collection of tables for the weary game master, and also more of those. It's by Madeline Hale. They're literally just tables. This is a table of food and spices. You can just roll on it. Or, mundane treasures. Or this one's like actual world building stuff, like enemy encounters, the number of enemies, the kind of enemies, etc., etc. I love tables because as a last minute prepper, usually they save so much time. They give you the inspiration you need to make the encounter. And that's what I love about it.
To piggyback on that really quick, also a really good book if you guys don't already have it. Every DM should have it. Sly Flourish's The Lazy Dungeon Master.
Yep.
Yeah, that whole series is really good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about it. Just it's fantastic. Go find it for yourself. It's super cheap.
All right. Well, we're about the midway point. Let's take a real quick break. Let everybody use the bathroom or get something to drink. In the meantime, while that's happening, I'll run a slideshow of the upcoming and currently running Kickstarters, and I'll drop the links in. If you see anything you find really cool, go check it out. Maybe you'll back something or find something that just speaks right to you. All right, we'll see you in a few minutes, everybody. And we're back. Awesome. Thank you for giving us a moment for a break, everybody. All right, let's get back to some of the questions. There were a couple in chat that we didn't get to because honestly, I found what we were talking about so interesting that I had to just keep going with it because it was good. So the first one is, how much railroading is acceptable?
Well, there's railroading and there's railroading, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to have plot points you want to hit, especially if you're talking about things happening in the world. That's actually my favorite way to railroad. Is you just say, look, there's something unfolding over here, and it's going to cause you all kinds of problems, and you somehow let the players know, and then if they want to, they can choose to face it or face the consequences, right? And usually if it's like, well, the world will end, and there's usually buy-in with the players that, well, we want to keep playing, so maybe we should do something about that. Are you railroading them? Well, no, you're presenting them with a situation, right? But if you do one of those things where it's like, well, there's 2 doors and you're thinking they have to go through one door, Yeah, that sounds like problematic design on my, unless you do the old Schrodinger's door trick where you're like, well, I don't care which door you choose. I'm going to put you in this room I want because I set up my terrain for that. I actually don't think that's that bad. I try to avoid that, but I mean, that's about the most railroading I'll get, and that's only when I'm like, no, but this is so cool.
Yeah.
I just need to share it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to give them 2 doors, I just assume they're going through both.
Yeah. I think that to kind of comment on what you were saying, we as GMs are also players, and we want to give you cool things to look at, to see, to touch, all of those things. And I do think that there, again, should be a little communication at the table, maybe before you start, maybe like if it comes up 1 or 2 times that the players are just really walking away from everything you're pitching them. Maybe at that point it's time to have a conversation of, hey, everybody, what kind of game do you want to play? Because it seems that we're trying to play 2 different games. But I think to give a what I feel like is a poor example of railroading is these are called tabletop role-playing games, not tabletop role-playing scripts. You are not, your job as a GM, a DM, a storyteller, whoever you are leading this table, it is not up to you how the story goes. What is up to you is making sure your players keep going, right? And absolutely exactly what Gwen said, there are checkpoints that you want to try to make at some point because it continues to make progress. Now, if your players are a bunch of like, we just kind of want to hang out in this cool world and it's just have a cool, fun time. If you've established that ahead of time, great, good. Less prep you have to do. But there's a bit of flexibility that you kind of have to have as a GM of wanting things to happen in a specific way and realizing that the way that your players may do it might completely change everything that you have planned. Usually for the better, though. Usually a player's idea is going to make what you had back here not really matter anymore in a positive way. Sometimes in a slightly aggravating way, but usually in a positive way.
Yeah.
And also all those ideas that you had that like, oh, the players didn't go to this one place and now all of that information is lost. No. You know what you've done? Saved yourself prep for later. You can reskin that encounter. You can reskin that NPC who had that very important piece of information that if they didn't get it, they're never going to get anywhere. Don't lock your answers behind an unwinnable quest or door or a thing that has to don't lock your answers behind a dice roll or a chance encounter. Unless you're prepared for somebody to never, ever, ever see or hear or encounter or succeed.
I've always liked going kind of the video game route. Like, okay, so there's 2 ways that I usually go about railroading when I need to, and I think every party, even the most experienced players, need a little bit of railroading from time to time. Just a wee bit, just to get you back on track. And one of the things is like there's an old sales adage: the best salesmen don't actually sell anything; they let the customers sell themselves. Right? So the way that I would implement that is if I have a major plot point that I need you to hit to keep pushing the story forward, but you want to go on a shopping trip to Waterdeep, no worries. Let's go on that shopping trip to Waterdeep. It'll be a blast. But when you're in the local tavern, you're going to hear rumors that are going to point you in that direction. And you just I'll just keep finding little ways to feed it into their minds that like you're overhearing or you're encountering people that are telling you the situation is getting more and more and more dire and they don't know what to do about it, or even try to spin side quests off of that'll lead them to those places. Have them interact with their favorite NPCs. Oh, I haven't heard from my mom in like 2 weeks. She's out in this area. Could you guys maybe do me a favor and go see what's going on and push them towards that narrative? The other way is I've also really enjoyed, like, again, referencing DOS2 and BG3, which we already have tonight. Sometimes you get to a point in the story where you're just running stagnant, right? And like you need to get to the next point. Well, you guys want to jump over here? That's fine. Just know that you can't get there for whatever contextual reason until you take care of this. I.e., there's a roadblock, there's a sleeping Snorlax in the middle of town, come back when you find a Pokeflute, etc., etc. There's ways to spin stuff like that. I just think like both of you have said, it depends on the group that you have and the players you have at your table, and also the stories that you're trying to tell. But like, railroading is kind of a necessity. Just like the severity of it obviously differs, and the style in which you deliver it differs. But also at the same time, like, yeah, you're not an author, and these people are not here to be like,
yeah,
they're not here to be the viewers of your one-man show. So like, you're not. It's not your game. You're just the ref. It's everybody else's game. So just like, let people play their game.
Well, I would counter that actually, because you are a player in this game as well. Like you have as much say in having fun and following the rules and telling the same story. I said it with another individual who asked me a similar question. We're players at the same table as everyone else. We just happen to know all the answers to all the questions. And I think it's really important to remember that while you are correct, it is a very different kind of role that is different from like the players at the table. I do 100% agree with that. I think too often there is this wide disconnect, this mentality that sometimes creeps up of an us versus them when it comes to like, oh, the GM's always out to get the players, or it's the player versus the GM, and in situations like that, where in reality, at least for me, I as a GM want to do everything in my power to make my players, unless it's a one-shot horror game where my intent is to absolutely destroy you, it is everything in my power to make you all feel like the most like extreme versions of heroes or villains or complete mundane individuals who got caught up in something way bigger than them. Whatever story you want to tell, it's my job to make that as fun for you as possible, which means that I get to have fun making NPCs interact with you and sometimes fudging dice rolls because it's more interesting for the story. You know, that kind of thing. So yeah, I get so sad when there's this mindset, not that you brought that up, Aleks, but the mindset of like, it's always DM versus players or like the DM's always out to kill the players. And that's like so sad. It's not true. We all want to have fun together.
I guess to kind of clarify, like, you as the referee, like, of course, like, I mean, hey, listen, if refs get paid to do a job, they're obviously enjoying doing it. I doubt you'll ever find a referee in any professional sport like hockey. It's like, no, this job sucks. I just do it for the paycheck. No, you're right. You're absolutely a player at that table. But yeah, as soon as you get to the mindset of like DM versus players, like I've talked to multiple DMs that have invited me to like their home tables where they start talking about certain homebrew rules and stuff like that. I'm like, dude, you're just punishing your players. Yeah, but that's fun for me. But that's not fun for anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, everybody needs to have fun. If the players are having a great time, awesome. But if you're not having a great time, it's still not a good game. And it's halfway not, it's already 50% bad.
And I have been in games where everyone is aware that there is a kind of adversarial play going on where the GM is like, okay, I'm going to try and crush you guys at this one. And the players are like, okay, bring it on. Let's see if we can do it. And the thing you've got to understand is it's 5 minds against 1. So like, it's actually pretty hard to outthink a group of players that are paying remote attention. But sometimes that kind of people do enjoy that adversarial environment. I know that certainly when I came up in role-playing games in the 80s, it was actually kind of common because of the history of wargaming that the game tabletop world comes out of. But so if everyone's clear that that's the point, it's okay. Just like Maria was saying with the horror game, like if you're sitting down to play Call of Cthulhu, I mean, yeah, if you don't get consumed by an eldritch horror or lose your mind, I mean, who's having any fun, right?
I think that kind of piggies a little bit into like consent at the table, because exactly like that with like something like Call of Cthulhu or Mothership or any like Alien RPG or anything that's similar to that. By playing that game, you are consenting to these things that are probably going to happen. You're probably going to find something that you absolutely have no business dealing with, and you will probably die. You will probably face something that is way beyond you, and you're supposed to, and not be okay afterwards. But it again goes back to that same thing of like talking to the table, making sure everybody's on the same page. Because I do also agree with you, Gwen. If people want to have that more adversarial, the GM's going to give you really hard things that will probably be really hard, and everybody at the table's like, hell yeah, let's go. We're going to really, really try to win every single time. We're going to try to beat whatever challenge you placed us. Then that's great. That's awesome. But again, that involves talking amongst yourselves beforehand and not just assuming, oh, I'm going to hit them with everything I've got and they're probably going to die. And then everybody at the table being like, why'd we all die? Why did you do that to us? At that point, it becomes, why did you, the DM, do this? Not why did you, the big bad, do this to us? And at that point, that I think is where there's a shift that is less fun for everybody.
Yeah. Let's talk about prep. So a lot of people, everybody preps differently. How do you prep for, and I'm going to give you two scenarios, a one-shot and say an 8-session mini campaign. You know, they're different beasts, I think.
Well, to in a way to tie into the previous question, I think a one-shot, it's okay to have a little bit more structure, right? Everybody knows it's a one-shot. There has to be kind of a lot of buy-in with the hook. Like you have to say, okay, so look, here's the premise. You're all adventurers, and then this NPC appears and asks for your help. This is not a time when the players can say, like, yeah, but I think I just want to go shopping. You're like, this is the adventure. Here it is. Take it, please, so we can have a game. So that does require, a little bit more, for me, prep of structure. I normally assume the players are just going to follow the clues or the lead or the walk forward through the dark like I'm asking them to. But in a mini campaign, then yeah, I definitely, like if I'm prepping, if I'm prepping longer form campaigns, I might use this piece of software, Scrivener, right? Where you have different chapters or encounters or locations in different little sections, and you can kind of pin them to the corkboard kind of note card style. And then it's like, what I like to do is kind of maybe have like I don't know how to describe this, like a garden of forking paths that ends up coming back to just one or two possible exits. You know what I mean? It's like I've got a bunch of places they can go to, and this is straight out of video game design. You're like, you need the 5 crystals to open the ancient gate. Yeah. There are 5 different places you can go with the 5 crystals. Where would you like to go first? Or maybe you need to go over here to find out where are the crystals or whatever. You just lay it out for them, and if you give them enough information that they can have some agency, you've avoided too much railroading, and you've done your prep, because you're like, okay, I need to make sure I have at least the first bit of each of these 5 locations, or just the first one they know about, or whatever. And then I like to prep maybe a week or 2 ahead of the players. That's about it. I don't play the whole thing out, because who knows how they'll make a hash of it all. And I think of like, well, what's the location? What are the key NPCs? And what are the key combat notes that might be hit with set piece battles or whatever? And then I also check in with the sometimes I check in with the players themselves and are like, how are we doing? What do you want from this game? Blah, blah, blah. But then I'll also check in with the characters in the sense that I think like, well, this character, this backstory says something about estranged parents. And I'm like, okay, how can I fit in estranged parents? Because I think when they create their character, when they create their backstory, they're giving me what they want. I just have to take it, remix it, and give it back to them in an unexpected way. Right? So that's what prep looks like for me.
Yeah, I think mine is pretty similar. One shots, One shots, I definitely agree, especially for streamed actual play one shots. If it is a streamed one shot that has a very hard start and end time, you have to be clear with your players. Hey, we have a start and an end time. This is the you have to buy into this, otherwise it's going to be no fun for anybody playing or watching. So there is a whole different kind of aspect to like streamed actual plays versus at home actual plays or at home gameplays. But I absolutely agree that one shots do require a little bit more railroading sprinkled in, and a bit more of very solid checkpoints that you have to hit, especially if you have a limited time. For a longer prep, I really like how you described it, Gwen, because I do want to take that now and use it. I'm a big make it up as I go along kind of player, or doing not backstory of the world or of our sessions, but taking things that have happened in sessions and making it relevant to the future. So an offhand comment that an NPC might have made might be more important or might lead to something way important in the future. Maybe that NPC that maybe you met once turns out to be way more important down the line, and it was foreshadowed a little bit. But in that moment, I didn't know. It wasn't until 3 weeks later when I needed someone to fit this role, and I'm like, oh wait, hang on, this is why you make notes, everybody, this is why you write things down. I can go back to my old notes and say there was this person and they had mentioned this thing. Oh, now I have a place for this thing to go over here, and suddenly start building an extra bit of this puzzle. It's for really long form campaigns, like campaigns that I know are going to progress for a while, that don't really have an end date. I also try not to have too much of a finale idea. And this is for like home games with like close friends kind of idea, kind of setting, where I will probably prep maybe a session or two in advance, maybe. Enough to get us started, like an intro to the session, and then exactly like Gwen was saying, a key, if we're in a location, all right, key points in this location, key people that they might need to talk to, and maybe one big thing that's happening, or a cataclysmic event or something like that. And have a loose idea of what kind of story thread I want to pursue for my players or with my players. And then I'm a really big make it up as I go along kind of person. I love improving. But that's the style that works for me. So that's how I prep. A lot of not prepping.
Yeah, I'm very much the same way. For me, most of, whether it's long form or short form, most of my prep work comes before session one, and it just slowly gets shorter and shorter from there. If I'm doing a long form campaign, I usually won't plan content more than what I foresee being 2 sessions ahead. And if any weird roadblocks come up, yeah, we just improv it. But specifically for one shots, and specifically streamed one shots that do need to be, like we talked about, a little bit more railroaded, those I try to just plan. I will plan the entire one shot story wise before we sit down, but I will plan like 3 variants of it. I usually dedicate, if I'm streaming a one shot, I will probably usually prep for about a max of 10 hours over the course of a couple of days. Long form campaigns, way easier. I will essentially just write out like, okay, here's where our story is starting. And then, like Gwen mentioned, I will note in advance what my players want, are communicating that they want, and I will kind of make mental check notes as we go along this is a good way to start integrating this into the story, and this is a good way to start integrating these dead parents, or like this lost cat, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and threading your way through that. But if you do the big chunk, at least I find the big chunk of your prep work before your game begins, it really limits how much you have to do going forward, whether it's long form or short form. How prepared you are going in is going to severely determine how much work you have to do versus how much you get to play going forward in your campaign.
So during the campaign, if you're struggling or you get stuck, what do you do to overcome the those roadblocks? Does that happen to you?
No, I'm an angel and I'm good at everything. It just comes natural. I mean, like, for myself personally, like, I watch and listen to so many other actual plays, like whether it's like the ones that everyone's listening to, like, you know, like Worlds Beyond right now is one that I've been really into, but also like a lot of like smaller indie creators. And I love to absorb not only people's mechanical styles, but also their storytelling styles, both from PCs and from DMs. And when I get stuck, I will specifically go out of my way to find a new smaller show where, like, you know, the Spotify description excites me or the setting excites me. And I'll power through like 4 or 5 episodes in a day. I mean, like, professionally, like, I spend a lot of time in my car, usually 8 to 10 hours a day in my car. So I have the time to dedicate to that. And I just find, like, you know, essentially, like, just conversating with your peers or letting your peers conversate while you listen in is a really good way to kind of get those creative juices flowing again, because you're still absorbed in the space of, like, you creating stuff as a dungeon master, but at the same time you're disconnected and just enjoying third-party media. So your brain gets a break from your actual game, but it's still working in the background, at least for me.
And when it happens in the middle of a game,
In the middle of a campaign or something.
well, if it happens in the middle of a session, you're like, oh, take a break. It's okay to have I mean, if you're not on a stream, it's okay to be like, all right, let's take a 10-minute bio break. And then you can kind of think about a solution. That always works for me. I'm trying to think of what I would do if I ever, like, oh crap, they screwed up my story so badly, I don't know how to move forward. I mean, it hasn't happened to me in the many years I've been running. But again, I also am very reactive response. So, like, I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's see what they're gonna do. And then I'm like, okay, they seem to want it. Like, I'd mentioned that campaign that went 1 to 20. You know, I just ran them through Lost Mines of Phandelver, and at the end, I was thinking, like, oh, I want to, like, keep this going. And one of the players was talking about, like, oh, can we get, like, a stake in the mine now that we help them clear it, and, like, maybe there's minerals in here. And I'm like, well, what would there be in here? And I'm thinking to myself, and you know, and there's a bunch of bats. And so I'm like, well, what do you get? I mean, there's guano in here. And then I remembered from whatever my studies of history class, that's actually a key ingredient in gunpowder. And I'm like, niter, right? And I'm like, oh, and there's the Neverwinter Woods right there, making it charcoal. And oh yeah, they're gonna. Oh, so they ended up being, yeah, you're key shareholders in this mine that inadvertently is going to be this new source of gunpowder in the West Sword Coast. Then the bad guys are using gunpowder, and nobody knows where they're getting it from, and it's from you. You're an arms dealer, and you didn't know it. And then that's where the story spun off from there, because somebody's estranged father was the bad guy who was using the gunpowder, you know. And so it's like, I don't know, what are they giving me? How can I do that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. Is when you're stuck as a GM, remember you have probably 3 to 6 other people, depending on how big your table is, who, just by virtue of playing, have given you a lot of tasty fodder to kind of chew on. Going back over if your characters have given you backstories, or you've taken notes on things that your players have said. That's why, again, I'm gonna really hammer in, take notes, or just revisit your old notes that you've typed up, because maybe something that you wrote 4 months ago that you thought you were going to use and never did use, you've forgotten about, and you can reread your old notes to maybe stumble across something that you didn't use or that you can reinterpret. A good thing to do as well, if you are in the middle of a campaign and you have the ability to do this, whether it is a streamed AP or a home game, is maybe just take a week off of, say, hey, everybody, I'm having a little bit of trouble right now, or I'm a little bit mentally tired from prepping right now. Can we take this week off, maybe do board game night, or somebody else runs a one-shot if you're at a table who can do that, to give your brain a little bit of breathing time and to give yourself a little bit of grace, because we are all human and our brains will only work so many hours in a day, especially if you have full-time jobs and all these other things. So it is okay to take a break. If it is a streamed AP, if it's one that has a very strict schedule or anything like that, it is always worth your effort to at least bring it up to whomever is, running it, sponsoring it, anything like that. Work within your means. And if you can't, for whatever reason, take that time off, rely on your players. That's something that's really important. If you have a table that is less role play forward, it can be a little bit more challenging, but I think it's still important, again, to go back to communicating with your table. If you're upfront at the beginning of the session and you've had, kind of a roadblocky week, you haven't really been super inspired about anything, you don't know quite how to progress, you can tell your players day of, say, hey y'all, I don't have a lot of ideas. So what do your characters want to do right now? And it might involve a lot of improv in the moment. That can then get you back on track to maybe some story thoughts that you had tucked away. Or it's an entire session of RP that you were not anticipating, but is beautiful and wonderful. Or maybe it's a combat that you weren't prepped for, but hey, maybe you just flip through the monster manual or whatever kind of like random stat blocks that you have, pull out like a bunch of stuff and say, okay, you have 6 spiders and also a wolf, and don't worry that they're all wolf miniatures. This one's the actual wolf, something like that. But I give yourself a break if you can. That's my big TLDR. If you can, give yourself a break.
And go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say really quickly, to piggyback on that, we're super blessed to be creators in a community that is incredibly considerate of things like mental health and all the other things that this community does a great job representing. If you're one of the people blessed to have an actual play with a consistent viewership, whether that's 5 viewers or 5,000 viewers, doesn't matter. If you guys come out and just say like, hey, I'm having a tough time right now and I need a mental health break, you're never gonna lose viewers or players at your table over needing a break. This community is so accepting and understanding of things like that. Don't be afraid to take a time out, even if it is like, like when we, for example, did Dummies, we recorded every week straight for 187 weeks. Oof. Never missed a week. And by the time that we got done with the finale, I didn't touch another TTRPG for like 7 months because my brain was just dead. No interest in playing it, nothing. Don't be me. Be smart. Take a break.
And if you have players that are combat heavy, as Maria said, give them a combat. But if you do have players that are RP heavy and you're like, well, how do I get them going? Okay, well, I'll steal from BG3. Actually, I did this in my game before BG3 because it's in video games everywhere. Okay, well, you talk about what happened last session and you're like, all right, well, now it's that night around the campfire. And you actually got a chance.
Campfire scenes.
To talk to players have a chance, characters have a chance to talk to each other.
Yes.
And get them going at each other. And you can just sit back and be like, all right, that was a good session.
Yeah. And what in campfire scenes, and it doesn't have to be an actual campfire. It can be a tavern. It can be wherever. But they do not waste your campfire scenes. Do not be shy about your campfire scenes, I should say, because not only does character bonding or contention come from those scenes, you get the very fun opportunity to just play the anecdotal narrator of, oh, hey, while you're having this conversation, this thing happens, or you start to think about this, or asking somebody to make a roll during an RP session between two PCs is great. If you want the drama, it's great.
Oh, you're muted, Scott.
Sorry, my dog had barked and I forgot I hit the button to mute it. I have no idea if the bark got through. Probably did. You probably heard it. It's funny because my next question was going to be about mental health, and you kind of already walked right through it. But the follow-up to that I have is about the 3 ands. To me, these are the 3 ands. And just walk us through how you process them through your game. Session 0 and safety tools, lines and veils, stars and wishes. Because I think they're 3 super important sets of tool things that need to always be discussed. So, whoever wants to go first, tackle the ones you find most interesting. Or
I was gonna say safety tools. Again, like most of us have, growing up in D&D, like in the D&D space in like the 80s and 90s, we didn't really have safety tools, at least at most tables. That's why things like Dark Sun slip through the cracks, something that we'll never see in 5th edition ever again. That's a setting that's just gone, which, had some of his merits, but also, like, looking back, because I still have my old Dark Sun books, like, some of the stuff in there is really problematic, guys. It's, like, real bad. But safety tools are... I think it was Maria that mentioned this, like, at the outset a little bit. You never really know what people have going on in their personal lives. And even if you do, you can never really gauge how someone else is going to react to the thing, because the way that you process certain things is going to be different than the way other people process it. What I have found really helps, number one, is obviously the standard, Google Sheets. List all the phobias that you can think of out there. Leave a comment box on the bottom if there's anything that because none of us are going to know everything. You know what I mean? But also, like, X cards are a huge deal. But I find that especially newer players or, like, more reserved players have a lot of issues feeling comfortable. Like, hey, I know there's 4 other people at this table, but I don't want to do this. So what I implemented years ago was just like, dude, pull out your phone real quietly and just fire me a text, just a stop sign emoji. My phone's always next to me when I'm DMing anyways. Whatever's comfortable for you to tell me in a stealthy way, like, scale it back. But also, I feel like talking to some other DMs, like, safety tools should not be a no and yes type of thing. It should be sit down with your players. Like, for example, specifically in a game, I had a player that was very much against, like, mind control and, like, the loss of bodily autonomy outside of combat. So I wouldn't have known if it was an outside. We were doing, like, a mind flayer type thing, so it's like it's hard to fit in this narrative. I'm never gonna tell you, like, no, that's not what I have in mind, so you're just gonna have to deal with it. But talk to your players, dissect the situation as much as they're comfortable with. Obviously, never press anybody to, like, get into things that they don't want to get into. But it's a lot easier to tell a good story when your players are invested, and safety tools go a long way in doing that. Even, work safety tools in your Decuma session. Let your players tell you. Just be mindful, and it goes a long way.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. To give a really practical example, I was running an actual play, and midway through, one of my players got in a minor car accident. But we were playing a space game. This was the Hellbind game. And midway through, our lines and veils changed because now their line was any kind of vehicle trauma, period. Which, in like space, there's a lot of potential for things to go wrong in vehicles. But because that line was now there, there's no way you're never gonna crash. You're never going to explode. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not going to happen. Because I value my players' fun over the narrative. You know, my players' safety over the narrative. And safety tools...
Especially if you assume it's their narrative, not yours. I mean, I think that's
Correct.
where a lot of DMs kind of get mixed up in this stuff, is it's not really your narrative, it's their narrative.
Yeah. You are absolutely a facilitator in weaving this story together with your players. And... safety tools, specifically lines and veils, and establishing them in session 1, there's a big discourse and a big pushback in a lot of spaces for having lines and veils, having restrictions, quote unquote, on your gameplay because it restricts your fun. What it does is it adds a fence post and a fence to the cliff to keep people from walking off the cliff. You have all of this space. You have the entire, Irish countryside, so to speak. You don't have to go over that cliff to have fun. Sure, you could have fun falling off the cliff if you wanted to, but not everybody's going to like that. Most people probably won't like that. So reframing it in your mind as this is not putting limitations on what we can't do. This is instead opening every door to what we can do. So like, for example, horror TTRPGs, absolutely critical to have lines of veils for me, because some people might be really against like bugs or insects of any nature. Great, we're not going to have any of those in there. But you know what people are not against? Eyeballs. So we're gonna just have eyeballs everywhere, or like blood stuff, or creepy sounds, or whatever it is. If it's not on the lines and it's not a hard veil, you can go really hard in those areas, bringing it up to your players if it needs to come up. But like, it's not a limitation. It will only make you a better storyteller and only make your story better.
Yeah, 100%. I would say when people push back on safety tools, I ask them some questions. I say, have you ever gotten together with your friends for movie night? And somebody might say, let's see, and somebody says, well, I'm not in the mood for horror. You don't make them watch a horror movie. That's just rude, right? And if it's more than just a preference, if it's like, no, they literally have... this would do them harm, then it's like having your friends over for dinner and somebody says, well, I'm allergic to shellfish, and you're like, I don't give a damn, it's oysters tonight. Like, what kind of host is that, right? That's just, you're just not being it's just common decency. Yeah. When a bunch of people get together to have a nice time and somebody has somebody has a line or a veil like that. So when I use safety tools, there's 3 times they kind of come into play. One is before the games begin, session 0. And that's when you you establish things like lines and veils. You discuss the shared assumptions, like what's the genre, I like to do like what movie rating are we shooting for, that sort of thing. What's the feel people want? I discuss lines and veils with them, and then during play you have something like it can be something formal like an X card or a stoplight system or an XNO or whatever, so that just people have an ability to. You can just be like checking in, how's everyone doing? And then after the end of the session, I like to have a debrief. And whether that's, what is it? I can't remember. Stars and Thorns, or I can't remember.
Oh yeah, Stars and Wishes. Yeah. There's like
Stars and Roses and Thorns, right. Roses and Thorns, or Stars and Wishes, or whatever. Sometimes don't make it quite that formal. Like, what did you like today? What worked? Anything you want to see more of? How are we doing? But again, that just is like common decency.
I just finished running what was a 3-year-long campaign, and one thing that I realized was the session 0 before each season was not enough. It obviously you need it before each season, but really I think you need a mid-season or an every quarter check-in. And interesting, like I was using Monty Cook's safety tools. Has a nice list, great set of lists. But I found out that it is short. 2 things that I introduced that bothered players. One of them was abuse. It was a teenager being abused by a father. Not on the list. I added it to the list, and matter of fact, I retconned an entire session because it bothered somebody. I had no idea, and it was never marked off. But it's the kind of thing where if your players are really bothered by that, not only does it stop, I never uploaded the session. I retconned the entire thing because that's what you do. Your players are more important than the bullshit story you're helping them stay. It's their story. Yeah. Don't feed into it. But the other one was character death, which bothered a player who, it was in the end of season 2 and a PC died. And it was really a very painful moment. I did not retcon the death, but I did talk to them quite a bit about it and worked through it with them as much as I could. I'm not a therapist, but I can at least understand their processing of it. And to me, that was important because I think that the death was important to the game and important to the player who was playing the character. It wasn't their... Sorry. One moment.
While the chaos ensues, I actually have a really great example of that exact same thing too. As part of Outcast and Outclassed, this will be a pretty decent spoiler for season 1, so I'll give folks a little bit of time. But in season 1, very early on, my character died. And while we had talked about the potential of that, I'm 99.9% fine with my character dying in any scenario because I'm able to kind of parse those differences. This was the first time where afterwards I was like, during it I was like, this is fine. Yeah, this is very tragic and a slow progression, but this is fine. And then afterwards, 2 days afterwards, I was like, hang on, hang on a second. And it was a multi-day processing of am I actually okay with this? Am I ready for this character? Do I feel like this character's story has been told in this whole session? And the answer to that was no. And so what ended up happening was a lot of discussion with my GM, Syrup, about, okay, so we know my character's going to stay dead, but what are we going to do after? Because we were level 1, I think, at the time, maybe level 2 in Pathfinder. Pathfinder 2E. And so we didn't have resurrection magic. We couldn't do anything about it. And Syrup was so fantastic in weaving a way to bring my character back with consequences. And also involving the other players in the process. And it's a really great way to take what wasn't necessarily a line or a veil for me, but something that I, as a player, still didn't resonate with, and it still didn't feel good, and it didn't feel right. The way that it was handled afterwards is, again, as I've said a bajillion times already, communication at your table. If something doesn't feel right to the player or the GM, because, again, in this instance, you are still a player, you still get a say in lines, in veils, and safety. If something doesn't feel right, you have to talk about it. It has to be brought up. Otherwise, you're going to continue hurting yourself or others around you.
Yeah. And specifically on that point, Gwen had mentioned that that she does, a check-in after every session, which is a great idea because sometimes, in that particular situation, you don't know ahead of time if something is going to hit you a certain way or not. And it could not be to like retrospect. Like for example, like I had no idea that I was like really uncomfortable with like eye stuff in TTRPGs. Like on TV, I just look away. It's whatever. I'm over it. And I played a game with a GM, I think maybe 2 years ago, off camera, where they were really descriptive of some eye horror stuff. And as it was going on, I was like, this is cool, whatever. And like kind of like processing the session after the fact, I'm like, oh, dude, I feel like lightheaded. That was really gross. I really don't want to go through that again, but it's not something that I thought was a problem for me until after it had happened. So yeah, communication, check in with your players multiple times. Like, one check-in, obviously it's just not enough because things change. People change. People are complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's another one of my games. One of the other game runners we have a sheet that's very well organized by them, but as they like to put it, and as I like to kind of incorporate for my online games, is that it's a living document. And all that means is this Lines and Veils sheet at literally any time of the year can change. And the best part about having it be like an online sheet is it's usually pretty anonymous. Like I'll know what I put on there, but unless like you're telling me you're adding something on there, it can remain anonymous. And if I have questions, it's going to be, hey everybody, I saw this was added on there. If you added it, please DM me so I can, check in with you about specific things. But having it be something that's never set in stone, like having portions of it that there's never going to be racism in my games because there's not going to be homophobia in my games because no, it's just, those are things that are never going to happen. But things can move from lines to veils, some things. For people, some things will move from veils to lines. Some things will just show up one day, and that's okay. But something that I like to add, speaking of lines and veils and like Google Sheets, is having a third column that your players can put in the things that they absolutely want to see in a game. So their must-haves, their desires. I played in a die RPG. Where one of them was queer tragedy, but like in a good way, or messy, make it messy, or a masquerade ball. These sorts of things that people are like, I want these things in there, and other people can add, little annotations that say, I also want this in there. To give more than just, I don't want these in my game, and also add in, but I do want all of these things in my game. Kind of gives people a little bit more, it gives you more things to be inspired by, but it also gives your players more of a say in the positives and not just taking out negatives, if that makes sense.
I love that. I love the positive spin on safety tools rather than only being about no's, but also being about, yes, pleases. I think that's a fantastic tool that I'm going to incorporate because I had not heard it like that, and I love that. And I'm always looking for new tools. We have reached the end of the night, and I want to respect your time. I think that it's important to respect everybody's time. I had questions about like schedules and stuff coming up, but we'll get to those in another GM roundtable coming up. So I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for the questions out of chat. Thank you, David Tilstra and Waffles and Shadowmane and all the other people that were there. It was a great session tonight. I loved all the questions and answers, great interaction, and we will see you next week. I don't remember what the episode's on next week, but it will be here. We'll
Tune in to find out, everyone.
Yes. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.